Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Krishnaratne. I'm an equity analyst at Paradigm Capital. So broadband always networks, advances in AI and machine learning, and the lowering of hardware device costs have helped enable the new Internet of Things economy, or the IoT economy. The billions of devices are driving an evolving distributed platform with more and more data being analyzed and processed, not just only in the cloud, but at the edge of the network in increasingly intelligent devices. I'm very excited today to host a panel on IoT with 4 thought leaders. I'd like to give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves before I dive into some really exciting Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barry Poe and head of product at Universal mCloud. Universal mCloud, just very quickly, is a high-tech company focused on using IoT, AI, and analytics to help manage energy assets all around the world.
Good afternoon. I'm John Proctor. I'm the CEO of Martello, which is a network performance management company. And if you stay in your seats, I'll be talking more about Martello straight after the panel.
Afternoon, Dan Kim, EVP Corp Dev with Baylin Technologies. We manufacture antennas for a whole range of products, from Samsung smartphones to small cells that go in cell phone towers to base stations and Internet of Things. You name it, if it needs to be connected to the internet, we make those antennas.
Ronan McGrath, a lead director for Photon Control. We manufacture high-tech measuring and sensor equipment for the manufacturers of equipment for the chip manufacturers. So we're well north of the chip manufacturers.
Thank you. And so for the first question I'd like to ask, we obviously are very early in the IoT cycle, but I'd like to ask each of you to kind of give us maybe 1 or 2 examples of, examples of IoT that you might be seeing at your firm, and what are some of the trends, what are 1 or 2 exciting trends you expect to see in 2019?
Well, I guess just to start, among the things that we do at mCloud are enable every building, in a city to essentially be smart by turning the thermostats that normally run your air conditioner, your heater, and providing them with internet connectivity. So if you've ever wondered what it would be like to have a conversation between multiple HVAC units, you can now do that through the magic that's mCloud's Asset Care. And so one of the things that we do is we're able to help coordinate the activities of all these assets when they're in operation, and as a result, find ways to keep people comfortable at lower energy cost. And so that's one really kind of exciting example of IoT at work, is where you kind of have this technology now where IoT used to be a premium feature. It used to be the kind of thing that you'd add on to a product in order to make it more expensive. What we're now seeing are that there are opportunities to reduce the cost of connecting buildings to the internet, and as a result, giving those buildings the opportunity to get access to the cloud, where you can do interesting processing, to do real-time optimization. Things that used to be the realm of very expensive control systems can now be done virtually using all of this kind of technology. So, lots of really interesting kind of opportunities there that, again, we're kind of just in the early stages of exploring.
I'll answer that with, how many of you have not heard of the term big data? Okay, I figured if no one reacted, I still got an answer, so I'm good. The answer with IoT is you think you've seen big data, you haven't seen anything yet, right? Because we all talk about these interconnected devices. We talk about the smart fridge, the smart thermostat, the autonomous vehicle. That's going to be a massive amount of data, which we actually don't have the networks to support. And I'll give an example. So we're currently working with QNX on an autonomous vehicle project. The autonomous vehicle itself will have a 40 gig network running around it. And somehow it's got to connect out. And if you look at sort of 5G, and we talk about 5G, at the moment there's about 23,000 cell towers in Canada. To do 5G, we need 230,000. Quite a big jump. So if you're into making cell tower stuff and aerials, good business to be in. But what that means is you've got to have a really, really complex network. So when we talk about big data, more network complexity, you're going to see more and more interconnection challenges. And I think that's really something we're not quite ready for, is the ability to scale up in both size of data and that network complexity.
Absolutely agree with you in terms of where we are in the early stages of the IoT development. I'll give you 3 specific examples of where we play in a subsector of IoT referred to as cellular IoT. So that's CIoT. It's about 10% of the market size of IoT. IoT in 2018, I believe, was about 20 billion devices, 11 billion devices. So CIoT is about 1 million devices in 2018, but growing at a much faster clip. Reason why that's an interesting market for us is we're approved with all the carriers in North America and a handful in Europe. And so anything that touches the cellular network requires carrier qualification. 3 good examples of which, we just won a contract with an OEM in the US to develop a new antenna. Many of you have cars with the shark fins in the back. Those shark fins, in fact, have multiple antennas embedded inside. You may not be aware. It has 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, near-field Bluetooth. All those antennas are buried within that, very similar to the architecture of what you find in your phone. We're very good at that. We do that for Samsung already. We make 200 million antennas for them a year. So we've taken that technology, adopted it, and now that we've developed an antenna that will be completely flush on the roof of cars, that'll be deployed later this year. That's one great example. John had referenced the amount of data that comes out of cars. Our key customer, AT&T, has suggested that 4G alone will generate 1 gig of data per mile driven for cars. Cars in the future will become effectively a mobile base station. So everything is getting connected in the car. They are really becoming computers. Another great example, and these are use cases that are driving the adoption, would be a waste disposal company in the US. They have 17,000 bins located globally. And what our customer wanted to know was when these bins are at a certain level of when they're full, they, instead of having truck runs removing empty bins or emptying empty bins, they wanted to be much more efficient in their deployment of their limited resources. So we put modules, developed antennas that sell for $1,500 a piece for these 17,000 units worldwide. It'll automatically notify the customer when the bins require attention. And lastly, into the same sort of the smart city type application, a lot of you have seen the downtown parking buildings where there's Wi-Fi antennas located above each spot that identify when the spot's available or not. That is now moving to the outside. And again, this is all requires cellular connections where Wi-Fi is not available. And this customer has obviously large real estate with regards to how to deploy this asset efficiently, and cellular gives them the perfect solution. It's ubiquitous and it's cheap, and that's just beginning in 2019 as well.
I think of IoT as part of a family of technologies. It really gets its benefit when it's allied with AI, and particularly when the 5G networks roll out. Now, I think 2019 is when you will see the rollout of commercial networks in the United States and Canada. You won't see and as a result, I think you're now at that sort of low point in the semi-industry where there isn't as much demand for new handsets because there isn't as much functionality benefit to customers. When 5G emerges, around early 2020, you'll see the handsets come, and at that point, there's going to be a very steep rise in demand. And we're seeing that in our development backlog at this point in time. So I think that 5G combined with IoT is an immensely powerful combination. And I think that you'll see a world of change. I think this combination of IoT, AI, and 5G is as big a change as the World Wide Web. I think it is that level of change for our society, and endless opportunity to develop on it.
Thank you. So a couple of really interesting points were brought up. First and foremost, smartphone growth, as we've heard over the past few months, is starting to plateau. If not, it's going to start declining. But to Dan's point, there are 11 billion connected devices out there. This is only going to increase the growth rates that Cisco's and Ericsson's and Gartner's are forecasting to double or triple over the next 5-7 years. So number one, we're going to see an explosion of devices. And then number two, you talked about the complexity of these networks with all the data that's coming from them. A lot of data to be managed, a lot of data to be understood and processed. So I'm going to direct a couple of questions. First, to Barry, I'd like to talk to you about what are your thoughts about how do you make sense of all this data that's being generated? What are the implications? And second, to Ronan, I'll ask you, how to think about considerations on the network, the underlying network, any of the hardware required to deal with this explosion of devices?
Sure. So it's a great question. Once you have all these IoT devices out there in the world, they're collecting lots of data. The real challenge then becomes not how you collect the data, but how you make sense of it. And that is a real challenge. If you kind of take a look at the history of, our ability to consume data, our hunger for data always outstrips our ability to supply it, right? So no matter how much data we're able to provide, there's always going to be somebody who has a use case that requires even more data. we kind of find ourselves in that scenario wherever we're dealing with systems. Autonomous vehicles being a really good example, where you have technologies that require reliable, statistically solid models that drive a lot of the intelligent behavior that you see. So one of the things that's really necessary is that learning and making sense of data isn't viewed as a point activity. It's the kind of thing that you do on an ongoing basis. So to your point a little bit earlier about AI really being kind of the cornerstone for being able to take advantage of a lot of that data, there's a sense here that one of the things that needs to happen as well is that there are methods and processes in place where learning is kind of a continuous venture, where you take advantage of data as it comes in, not just to kind of bootstrap a system, but to get it into a place where you're actually continuing to learn and there's increasing value coming from that data stream every step along the way.
I think the pressure on networks will be immense because the amount of data we're talking about is a quantum leap below where we are now. I think you'll see a necessary growth in edge computing for sure in terms of being able to manage those networks. And the network management software will have to be completely revised. I do think that there are also issues coming in terms of data privacy, in terms of data security, and there's going to have to be a lot of work to make sure these networks are in fact secure and increasingly manage the privacy of user data.
So we've talked about a lot of different players that are going to be participate in the IoT ecosystem. You've got the carriers, you've got device and hardware manufacturers, and you've got software and apps developers. So the question that I'll pose to Barry first, and then anyone other of you can join in. I'd like to understand your thoughts on who are the real the winners, who might be the losers, who might stand to benefit the most in the IoT ecosystem. I think an argument can be made that in the current iteration that the telcos may have lost. They continue to be looked at as dumb pipes when social networks such as Facebook have really accumulated a lot more of the value, especially when you look in the growth in market cap. I'd just like to have your thoughts there on who you think the main winners could end up being.
Well, maybe just my perspective on it is that we only win if everyone wins. And the reason for that is because at every single level in that ecosystem, there's value being generated. And if any one part of that chain doesn't exist, then the entire ecosystem doesn't exist. So it's really important to kind of take a look at all of the different layers at which this technology kind of gets enabled, whether it's kind of at the hardware level or at the network, at the protocol level, or you're kind of looking at the application level, which is where mCloud sits. We do a lot of work with drones for aerial surveys of wind turbines in buildings. And one of the interesting things is that if you take a look at a drone as a platform, there are probably thousands of independent components that are running on that drone. But if any one of them doesn't work, the drone doesn't operate. If the drone doesn't provide data, then we can't do our jobs. So at that kind of level, it's really, really important that all of the different components of the ecosystem are vibrant, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to get the value that everyone talks about.
I think really, and again, you sort of said define the winners and losers. I think rather than sort of specific, you can look at certain characteristics and go back to the comment here, which is the companies that are willing to partner, right, and are agile, they will be the winners. And I mean that because if you look at even what's happening in the 5G space and the IoT space, most companies are working out, who do I work with? This is such a big environment. I go back to Ronan's comment on the complexity of it, the scale of the data. No one company is going to handle that. There's going to be no one player. They're going to have to partner. You're going to have to team. You're going to have to, there could be a drone up, but how does that drone connect in? How does that drone then process the data? There'll be so much work to be done, right? If somebody says, well, I can just do it all and they isolate themselves, they'll lose. There's the loser, is the person who says, well, I can do everything myself. I don't need to partner with anybody else. Because the other thing is, we actually don't know completely what it's going to look like. So the big companies aren't agile enough to develop the things we'll need in time, so they're going to find the small companies. And even, again, there's even folks like BlackBerry QNX have created an accelerator program to bring in 5-person companies or folks like us or whatever, because they recognize even at their size, they're already at the stage of, we can't do everything. We're going to have to find our partners. We're going to get a supply chain to help us, and they will be that sort of organization with that vision will be the winner. We can do it ourselves, don't come talk to us, they'll lose.
I would say absolutely agreed. In terms of the biggest winners that we see, if you look at today, each of us would use roughly 400 antennas per day believe it or not, that we would connect to from Wi-Fi to the 6 antennas in your phone to everything else that you're exposed to. In short order, that number is going to be going to 4,000 antennas. So you're going to see a world where the densification of antennas is going to increase by at least a factor of 10. So in that world, Kevin talked about the carriers. Are they the winners? They certainly would like to be. In the world of 5G, they are actively positioning themselves to capture more ARPU. How will this deployment of 5G, which is going to be the biggest deployment in telecom history, make sense from a return on investment for the carriers? That's going to happen from all the enterprises that will be launching new services and tracking all their assets and then putting ARPU on that. It's not going to be us paying double ARPU for our cell phones because we could download YouTube faster. It's going to be the number of devices that will grow within the network. So I think the winners will be players like the carriers. I also think players like Samsung. There's very few players in the world that are large enough that have devices in your home that have the entire suite of products from chips to memory to devices, and in fact cellular stations as well, that would win in an ecosystem where they can connect through their own devices. And at the risk of being self-serving, all these devices require connections, from devices that will cost $1 that'll connect to a potato inside a factory to thousands of dollars for antennas that will go on cell phone towers. John had referenced Canada's need for new cell phone towers, the same is going on in the US. There are 400,000 cell phone towers in the US. That needs to grow to over 600,000 for 5G. And Europe is just behind that. So you're going to see an explosion in terms of what's required to support all the edge networks as IoT continues to unfold.
I think we haven't really talked about Industry 4.0, but basically, if you look at China, they have a very well-developed, world-leading expertise in AI, on IoT, and they're going to change the economics of manufacturing dramatically in the next few years. So companies here, the losers, are going to be companies that have traditional manufacturing environments and don't have an IoT strategy, because I think there is going to be a step function in cost that we're going to have to deal with. In terms of the other winners, that we haven't mentioned, I think the opportunity for app developers will be simply huge. Whenever you get a change of this magnitude, it's inevitable that there'll be brand new companies that we haven't even imagined yet in the next 3 or 4 years that will become names such as Facebook. I think that always happens. So I think we should be aware that the next generation of leadership companies is out there.
Final question to all of you. We've talked about the IoT vision that you see over the coming years, but what would be some of the bigger risks? I think, Ronan, you might want to start. You talked about security as being an issue, and just what are some of the barriers or risks to achieving this goal?
Well, I think security is an issue, and it depends on the geography. What's interesting is consumer technologies. There's a level where people take a much higher privacy risk and still will buy the product. So I think you've got a bit of a conflict. But if you deal with something like elder care, where there's a significant opportunity to use IoT to provide predictive analytics, to provide in-home care and so on, the challenge is going to be how do we manage the ownership of that personal data, and how can we prove it that it's safe? And secondly, company reputations are destroyed on data losses. I think there may be an opportunity to see more blockchain computing in terms of being able to protect data in a more private way.
Sure. From my perspective, in terms of what we're seeing with our customers, I think the primary driver is seeing a demonstrable return on investment and or some type of specific use case. And I gave you 3 examples before. I'll give you 2 more that are not in cellular, but in fact in Wi-Fi, because we manufacture those antennas too, so another plug, sorry. But in terms of, we have a semiconductor customer who works with a data center, and this data center customer wants to monitor the temperature of every server in its rack. And so those require a Wi-Fi module on every server, and we can in real time identify the temperature and then address it if it goes out of spec. That's an antenna that would sell for $15 to $20 per. Of course, you have thousands of racks within a data center, and the data center market, because of cloud computing, is just exploding in growth. Another great example would be employees, tracking employees internally within a corporation. So if you want to monitor where employees are moving, through what doors, what's secure, what's not secure, access points, all that type of thing. Again, this is a device that you would carry on your employee card, and through Wi-Fi antennas installed on the ceiling, you could track employees using triangulation. So I think over the course of time, what we're seeing now is customers come to us. If the antenna can cost $1, that's one use case. If the antenna costs $2,000, that's a different use case. And in each case, there always has to be a demonstrable return. And we're seeing that now. The technology's there. Privacy is still a concern, of course. Security is still a concern. But enterprises will not entertain any of that until they can make money on it.
I think there's a potential, the real issue here is we're going to have so many sensors out there. What if you want to be more private? You use that business example. What if I don't want my work to know where I am every minute of the day? And it could be that the card I have does that. It's my physical and logical entry, so it knows I'm in my room and it knows I can then log into my computer. What if I choose not to? And I think that's the challenge we have is sort of, when we look at IoT and the amount of sensors coming out, what are we comfortable with? How much are we comfortable giving out to receive the benefits? And I don't think from a sort of both a philosophical and ethical thing we have answered that yet. And again, that's kind of the challenge we have going forward as we deploy these multiple sensors. We're certainly comfortable with servers going on, but what about yourself? How much are you willing to become visible in that IoT ecosystem for the benefits it could give you? And I don't think we've completely answered that yet.
I certainly agree with everything that's been said here. I think there are technological, there are engineering challenges associated with making IoT work, especially when IoT is kind of pervasive in every aspect of our lives. So if you looked at kind of a smart building example where I was talking about smart thermostats, you want your building to operate 100% of the time. As in, if the air conditioner or the heater stops working because you're not connected to the internet, that's probably not good for the occupants who are in the building. So the infrastructure needs to be able to sustain kind of mission critical quality in terms of robustness and reliability. So there's certainly that technological or engineering challenge. I think there's also kind of a cultural people challenge that needs to be overcome as well. To your point, Daniel, about kind of the enterprise looking at having a solid business case. There are a lot of trades, a lot of industries out there that have the potential to be disrupted because of access to IoT connected technologies. And so the honest question for a lot of stakeholders, especially when we go out and we talk to people who are interested in this, is they always want to know, what does my job look like in 5 years' time because IoT exists? And there are no clear answers. So that's certainly another place where there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of need for us to be able to learn what the future looks like as we take our first steps forward.
Well, with that, I think I'll close off the conversation. This has been a really helpful and beneficial conversation for us all, I think. And again, I thank all of you for participating in the panel. Thank you very much.